what could, from the perspective of what we can do, which is I'm sure what's all on our minds, international pressure and getting ceasefire resolution seems like the best thing we can do, I guess, although it may be a drop in the bucket. There was a revealing exchange with Ro Khanna where activists went into Ro Khanna's office, and Ro Khanna is one of the people who have said, I want to minimize civilian casualties, IDF should do better, but has not signed on to the ceasefire. And the activists, and Ro Khanna said that he would support a ceasefire if he saw a pattern of international humanitarian law violations. And he said that Israel targeting hospitals is such a hypothetical, And what I want to say is the activists didn't really have a good response to him. Like they couldn't point to a pattern of international humanitarian law violations, either from the current campaign or from past campaigns. And to get to my question, you are a forensic scholar, as you like to say, and we need to learn details of that stuff so we can point to a pattern of international humanitarian law violations so we can make the case. What can we read from you and how can we shape our messages to congressional staff, for example, to make those arguments better?
Okay, so I'll just repeat for the video audience. What is the best evidence? What is the best case to make to show that Israel's repeated systematic violations of international law and attacking Gaza?
Well, there are two things. Number one, and I don't want to be ad hominem, I have to resist the temptation. Though sometimes I forget that admonition to myself.
Often.
Yeah. Only in private. You have to be a moral idiot to think at this point that Israel's massacre in Gaza is the application of international humanitarian law.
But Congress isn't really.
Number one, on October 8th, there were 3 statements made by senior officials. Statement number 1 by Defense Minister Gallon. We're not letting in any water, fuel, food, or electricity. Full stop. Statement number 2 by Chaim Herzog, the president of Israel.
Yitzhak.
Excuse me?
Yitzhak.
Herzog. Or Yitzhak. Excuse me. Yitzhak Herzog. We don't distinguish between civilians and combatants in Gaza. They're all Hamas. Statement number 3 by Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu. This is going to be a very long war, much longer than ever before. The longest recent war, I won't go back to 1982, the longest recent war, massacre, was in July, August 2014. It lasted 51 days. So if you add those 3 statements up, what you have is no food, no water, no electricity, and no fuel for 51 plus days to the entire population of Gaza. Now, that was stated on October 8th. That is a murder plan. That is a genocide plan. And if you don't want to hear the word genocide, well, guess what? Too bad. Because that's what it is. It's a genocidal plan. And ever since that day, everything Israel has done has been in accordance with that genocidal plan. Israel has systematically targeted hospitals, systematically targeted ambulances, has systematically leveled the entire infrastructure of Gaza. And you still can't make up your mind whether or not what's happening in Gaza is in accordance with international humanitarian law. You're a moron. You are a moron. A moral idiot. Now, Comrade Lenin liked the expression a moral cretin, but no, You're a moral idiot. But then we have to acknowledge that international humanitarian law is in large parts completely lunatic itself. So let's take one example. There is this ridiculous, okay, I won't call it ridiculous. I don't want to prejudge my argument. There are three central principles of international humanitarian law, what's called the laws of war. One is called the principle of distinction. Everybody knows it. You can't target civilians. You can't target civilian sites like hospitals, schools, and so forth. You can only target combatants and military sites. A tank brigade, whatever. Okay? Everybody knows that principle. Then there is a second principle. It's a principle of discrimination. You can't use weapons or methods of warfare which are unable to distinguish between civilians and combatants. For example, poison gas. The poison gas, once it spreads, it can't distinguish between civilians and combatants, so it's called an indiscriminate weapon, and it's illegal according to those basic principles of the laws of war. And then there's this third concept. It's called the concept of proportionality. And the concept of proportionality is very simple. So let's say Colin Robinson is sitting in the first row. He is a senior member of Hamas. Okay? And he has been responsible for one terrorist bombing after another. Can you raise your hand, Colin? Because people are straining to see you. Okay. Now, the question of proportionality is as follows. If Colin is a legitimate military target because he's a combatant, having committed and will commit in the future many heinous crimes, how many civilians are you allowed to kill in order to legitimately, according to the laws of war, take out, if you don't mind that expression, Colin, take out Colin? So that's called proportionality, that the number of civilians killed must be proportional to the value of the military target. Colin being a high value target because he's a high level officer in Hamas. He's committed crimes. He will commit more crimes. And then the question is, no, it's a very serious question. I'm not making this up at all. Can you use a weapon to take out Colin, which will kill everybody in the room? That's not a joke. That's what proportionality means. In order to eliminate Colin, can you kill everybody in the room? Look around you. Can you all be killed? Is he a legitimate target? And often, when I discuss this with students and I take the case of killing everybody in my class, obviously they get very queasy about this notion of proportionality. So it's a very nebulous, it's basically an utterly ridiculous, useless concept, because how can you possibly measure things like that? The value of the military target versus the number of people who can legitimately be killed. So it's already a ridiculous concept. But then you reach that point of moral insanity. So, Gaza is one of the most densely populated places on God's earth. And then, it is among the most densely places on God's earth, Jabalia refugee camp is among the most densely populated places in Gaza. And then, 3 days ago, Israel dropped two 2,000-ton bombs on Jabalia. Okay. That to me sounds... and they claim there was a Hamas leader there, and there were also the tunnels the tunnels. And then you read the Guardian newspaper. I opened up the Guardian, and the Guardian has an expert in international humanitarian law. Those doctors of death, the experts. And she says, it's a very tough question whether it was okay. It's a very tough balancing act, this proportionality. And at that point, you just have to say, if you think that's a tough question, whether or not it's legitimate to drop two 2,000, is it pound? Pound. Two 2,000-pound bombs on a crowded refugee camp in which half the people killed are children, then either the law is insane or you're insane. But I really don't want to enter into that universe. I don't even want to go there. If you can't see the utter insanity of a statement like that it's a tough balancing question.
Thank you.
And you see it so far in the official numbers. So I believe from Israeli sources, the official figure that they have, according to their own calculations, they killed about 60 Hamas operatives. Let's take that at face value, assume that's true. So you have 60 Hamas operatives versus 10,000 slain Palestinian civilians overall, including more than 4,300 children. So you see if those numbers are correct.
Israel has killed more children in Gaza than in every other war zone in the world, every other war zone in the world combined for the years 2020, 2021, and 2022. In each of those years, if you take all the child deaths and combine them, Israel has killed more children in Gaza. When I mentioned that fact on a program, what is that called? The Comedy Hour?
Comedy Cellar, yeah.
Comedy Sellers. When I mentioned that fact, this fellow named Eli Lake, he got this very skeptical look in his face, and he said, more than in Ukraine? And it was interesting. Because the next day, somebody sent me the statistic. In the 20 months of the war in Ukraine, in the 20 months, 550 children have been killed in 20 months. Remember that from day one, there were claims that Russia was committing genocide in Ukraine.
Joe Biden said that.
Right. And after 20 months, they had killed 500 children. And when I was on that program, at that moment, in 3 weeks, Israel had killed already 3,500 Palestinian children in Gaza. And yet, people wonder whether Israel is either applying the laws of war or committing a genocide in Gaza.